Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director here at Word on Fire. And joining us is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, great to talk with you.
Brandon, always a joy to be with you.
You know, it was also a joy to be with you about a week or so ago for your birthday party out in Santa Barbara. Talk about that great gathering.
Yeah, it was wonderful. My birthday is November the 19th. I think it was the day before, wasn't it? Because I was busy on the 19th, but some of the Word on Fire gang and then some of my friends here from Santa Barbara came for a wonderful birthday party here with a great meal and then some wonderful gifts afterwards and lots of fellowship. And one of my gifts I have sitting right next to me, Brand, that you gave me is the little bust of G.K. Chesterton. I've got it right here on my desk. But I got some wonderful things, including a new pectoral cross that I've been wearing a lot recently. It's a silver cross I really like. So anyway, it was a joyful day and sort of two phases of my life, the Word on Fire part and then the Santa Barbara part coming together was a great joy for me.
I want to also talk about an exciting event next month, also out there in California. On January 13th, I believe it is, you are going to be joining William Lane Craig, who is one of the most prominent evangelical Protestant apologists and evangelists. And the two of you are going to come together for a single night of dialogue at Claremont College out there in California. Talk a little bit about this event and William Lane Craig. Who is he and why are you excited about joining him?
Yeah, I really am excited about this day, and there'll be two phases to it. The first in the afternoon, we'll be exchanging kind of brief philosophical papers. Then there'll be a conversation with a handful of scholars, so more of a high-level conversation. Then, as you say, in the evening, there'll be this open session on, themes of evangelization, culture, proclaiming the gospel, Catholic, Protestant differences. Who is William Lane Craig? He's really one of the best and best known of the, I'd say, apologists working today. So he's someone that uses a good deal of the philosophical tradition. He has a great knowledge of the scriptures, comes at it from a Protestant perspective, but using a lot of what I would call the Catholic intellectual tradition to take on the new atheists and a lot of the opponents of the faith. I discovered him maybe about 10 years ago, and I've just become a fan of his. And so when we had this opportunity, mediated by some mutual friends, I thought, yeah, I'd love that. I'm always intrigued by ecumenical conversations, and of course, I love the work of evangelizing and apologetics. So I think it should be a pretty lively little exchange.
So if you want more information on that, just go to wordonfire.org/conversation. It's actually open to the public. So if you're in the California area and you'd like to come out, go to wordonfire.org/conversation and RSVP. We're planning to live stream the event on January 13th through Bishop Barron's Facebook page. So be on the lookout for that, but it should be a very exciting event here. Okay, Bishop. Well, today we are going to return to the very popular style of Q&A involving children. People have been messaging us saying how much they loved the episode where my kids threw a bunch of questions at you a few months back, and we decided we should do a sequel. So we solicited questions from kids who wanted to ask their favorite Catholic bishop whatever was on their mind, and we got a lot of great questions coming in. So today, I thought I'd throw a lot of those at you and see what you have to say to these young kids, okay?
Look forward to it.
All right. Well, first off, we have Reese, who has a wonderful question about dinosaurs. Here's Reese's question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name is Reese, and I'm 4.5. Did people live when dinosaurs lived? And why did God kill dinosaurs?
Thank you, Reese. That's a great couple of questions. The first one's pretty easy to answer. No, people didn't live when dinosaurs lived. So they disappeared. They speculate about 65 million years ago. And then we came on the scene much, much later. So no, we didn't live at the same time. And then your second question, why did God kill the dinosaurs? I would put that question a little bit differently. I don't think God kills things. God lets things die. I mean, so look around the world, so all the plants and trees and so on, all the animals that have ever lived, human beings, living things die. And God allows that to happen. God lets it happen. Now, why? All sorts of reasons. Living things give glory to God. They reflect some of God's glory. God God allows them to come and then to go and be replaced by others that give him glory in a different way. We die physically, but we don't die spiritually. So we're different kinds of creatures. But I wouldn't say that God kills things. I'd say that God allows living things to exist for a time, and then he allows them to fade away and be replaced by other ones. And the same thing happened long ago with the dinosaurs, and it happens really to all living things. But we will live forever because we're more than just bodies. We're also spirits. So those are a good searching questions you raised there, Reese, and people have been asking questions like that for a long time.
Bishop, some of my skeptical friends offer this objection. They say that most of the universe is unreachable, unexplorable by humans. So it seems like a giant waste. If the whole universe was created with humans in mind, why would God create this vast cosmos, 99.9999% of it, which is unreachable by us? And I suppose that same objection could be played at dinosaurs. Why would God create all of these animals, but then kill them all off before the first humans came onto the scene? What was his purpose in creating extinct species like that?
Well, I mean, go back to Genesis. So we human beings come at the end of that process in the poetic account of Genesis. We lead the praise of all creation. I mean, that's what it means that we come last, like those who preside at a liturgical ceremony. But see, I think part of that means that God brings things into being long before we're around. So the universe is not for us in that sense, as though it all centers around us. Things give glory to God in their own way. They reflect the divine beauty and glory, even if we puny human beings don't take it in. Their very existence is a hymn of praise to God. The dinosaurs, in their own unique way, gave glory to God, reflected some of his majesty. But if we weren't around to see it, in a way, so what? God saw them. God took delight in them. So I think we have to avoid a kind of anthropocentrism where it's all about us. I know all the fine-tuning kind of arguments where there's some truth to the claim that in a way the universe is fine-tuned to lead to consciousness on our part. But I wouldn't want to read the whole universe in an excessively anthropocentric way. Dinosaurs gave glory to God by being themselves.
Next up, we got a question from young Hazel, who lives in Nashville. Here's Hazel's question.
Hazel from Nashville, Tennessee. I am 11 years old. So you know how it's not a sin that if your husband or wife dies, it's not a sin to marry again? Well, when you're all in heaven, wouldn't it be kind of awkward with both the birth parent and the step parent there?
That's a very good question. And it was, of course, raised to Jesus himself in the New Testament. They pose this kind of puzzle to him of what if someone who's, husband has died or wife has died and they've remarried many times, and what will be like in heaven? And Jesus' answer, which is the answer to your question, is here on earth, we marry and are given in marriage. Marriage is something that belongs to our way of life here. And it's tied very much to having children, et cetera, et cetera. But see, Jesus says in heaven, we won't marry or be given in marriage. Now, why? Because in heaven, we will live in such an intense communion of love. It'll be as though everyone's married to everybody else, if I can put it that way. You know how two people who are married to each other love one another in this absolutely intense way. And in here below, we can't share that with everybody. It's just impossible. But in heaven, when we're in the presence of God and our lives are totally transformed by love, in a way, we're married to everybody. It's not an exclusive thing, but we're all members now of Christ's body in heaven. So think of heaven as not less than marriage. It's more than marriage. It's marriage at a higher pitch. And therefore, to answer your very good question, it won't be awkward. See, it would be awkward here below on earth. It would be kind of strange. But in heaven, when everyone is intensely in love with everybody else, then it wouldn't be awkward. That we would all just share in the joy of this very intense shared relationship. So think of a married couple here below that are deeply in love and they're connected to each other. Now, intensify that and universalize it to everybody in heaven. That's what it's like. And that's why it wouldn't be awkward. It would be wonderful.
This might be drifting into the realm of theological speculation, Bishop, but what's your sense on when we get to heaven, will we recognize people that we knew on earth? Will we recognize our spouse or our friends or whatnot?
Absolutely, but in a heightened way. You know what I'm saying? So it's never less than here. See, we shouldn't fall into a Platonic trap whereby heaven means we've sort of left behind all this grubby matter and particularity, and now we're in this purely abstract realm. No. Heaven is construed in a very, if you want, physical way, but it's an elevated, transfigured materiality. So I'd say, yes, indeed. We'll know everybody, and we'll know them in a heightened way. We'll know them more fully, more richly, more intimately. So we don't leave anything behind. We find it intensified. That's why maybe you and I think you talked about this one time. That lovely image of like a two-dimensional figure being raised to 3 dimensions. So think of a square becoming a cube or a triangle becoming a pyramid. The pyramid's not less than a triangle. It's like a triangle now cubed, a triangle brought to a higher expression. That's what heaven will be like, I think, is this world, not less than this world heightened, perfected, new dimensions of it opened up. Whatever marriage means here below, it means something far greater and more universal in heaven.
Excellent. Next up, we're going to hear from 2 young brothers, Charlie and John, and their questions are very similar, so we're just going to play them back to back here and tackle them as a pair. So first up is Charlie.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name is Charlie Fulgoshin from Kingwood, Texas, and I'm 5. And why was there an earthquake when Jesus was crucified? I look forward to your answer.
All right. And here's his little brother, John, with his own question about the crucifixion.
Good.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name is John from Kingwood, Texas, and I'm 3. So, why was the veil torn when Jesus was crucified?
So why was there an earthquake and why was the veil torn at the crucifixion?
Those are great questions. And can I say, I think both Charlie and John should be priests. You guys should be preachers. You got these nice, strong voices and a lot of enthusiasm. That's terrific. And they're great questions. The earthquake. See, Jesus' crucifixion means that the whole world, in a way, has been shaken and turned upside down. So God has gone all the way down into our sin. God has taken upon himself the sin of the world. The sin of the world has overwhelmed the Son of God. There's something awful about that. You know, it's like the whole world has been shaken by that. The crucifixion of Jesus changes everything, not just in us, but changes nature. Now, see, keep in mind, the crucifixion always points to the resurrection, right? So when Jesus rises from the dead, it means everything we thought about the world has now been changed. It's been turned upside down. It's been rattled and shaken. So the earthquake, I think, signals this revolution that happened when Jesus was crucified. It had an impact on the whole world, on all of nature even. And then the question about the veil, that's a really cool one. The veil that little John is talking about there is the veil that separated the Holy of Holies in the temple from the rest of the temple. And it meant the most sacred part of the temple where God and his people came together. When that veil is torn, it means that everyone now gets into the Holy of Holies. Or put it differently, what's in the Holy of Holies now comes out to us. Because, see, through the cross and resurrection, we are brought together with God. Humanity and God are now united again, see? And so the tearing of the veil is really good news. You know what else? Every time you go to Mass, you take advantage of the fact that that veil has been torn. Because now the Mass, which represents to us the dying and rising of Jesus, is our contact with God. It's the new Holy of Holies. So the tearing of the temple means we can all get in, and we get in precisely through the Mass. So I think that's the best way to answer that one.
All right, next up is Connor, who has another question about heaven. Bishop, there's a couple more questions here on heaven and hell. I'd say about half of the questions we got from young kids were pertaining to the last thing. So before I played this question, I'm just curious, what do you take from that? Why are kids so interested in heaven and hell and what happens after they die?
Because they've got a good spiritual instinct, and we tend to knock that out of them, sadly. I think we're wired for God, right? We're wired for union with God. And the last things are all about that. So what does it mean to be in complete friendship with God? And I think kids do have a natural instinct for that. It's fascinating to them. Now, we'll tend to knock that out of them and say, oh, no, be concerned about, taking care of the poor and doing the works of mercy, all of which, of course, are great. But I think this, we'll use our jargon term, this eschatological side of the faith, we tend to, maybe we shunt it aside. And I think the kids have a very good instinct for that. And we should talk about it with confidence.
Okay, here's Connor's question about heaven.
My name is Connor Volkert. I live in Fairfax, Virginia. I am 7 years old. My question is, if you die and go to heaven, do you become a saint? Thank you.
That's a cool question. And, I'd say, Connor, is to be in heaven is what it means to be a saint. Does that make sense? So when you say somebody's a saint, what you're saying is, oh, that person's in heaven. See, saint just means holy, right? And heaven means the state of pure holiness, that I've come into complete friendship with God. Now, it might happen after some time in purgatory when we need to be purified. So most of us, I think, will die and we're not perfectly saintly. We still have something that needs to be kind of washed away or purged away. So once you've gone through that process and you come to heaven, it means you've come to full friendship with God. You're a saint. So the only ones who are in heaven are, like, if you get there, please God, you'll be Saint Connor. Now, the church on earth sometimes recognizes people as saints in a formal way. So we say we canonize them, that we officially recognize them. So St. John Paul II, for example. Now, we do that for all kinds of reasons. And one of them is so that people can be inspired by this figure. He's a good example. But John Paul II is no more a saint, if you want, than a perfectly unknown person who's now living in total friendship with God. So everybody in heaven is automatically, if you want to put it that way, is automatically a saint.
All right. Next up, we have another question about heaven and hell. This one comes from Grace. Here she is.
My name's Gracie, and I'm from Denver. My question is, when you die, if you go to hell, will you actually stay there forever? Or when Jesus comes to judge the living and the dead again, could he judge you and take you to heaven, or will you be stuck there for the rest of your life?
Good. Thank you. Another good eschatological question from the kids. I go back here, Gracie, to someone that both Brandon and I like very much, and that's a man named C.S. Lewis. And he said that the door to hell is locked from the inside. I see what he means by that is that if someone is in hell, that person has chosen to be there. See, hell means that you're separate from God, that you've locked yourself away from God's love. And so if you're in that state, it's not so much because God sent you there and locked the door on you. It's because you've gone there through your own freedom and you've locked the door. See? And so I would think of it differently. Think of hell. If someone is in that state of hell, they've gone there. Does Jesus want us out of hell? Yeah. That's why he came. That's why he came to rescue us from that terrible state. Now, let's say someone has locked himself away from God's love, but Jesus wears them down. Jesus' love is so insistent, and the person finally says, okay, I open myself to it. Well, then maybe we'd say they weren't really in hell, they were in purgatory. They were actually having their sins purged away, and then they were called to heaven by Jesus. So think of that little image from C.S. Lewis, that the door to hell is locked from the inside, not from the outside. We're not so much thrown into hell, we put ourselves there. Maybe an image you could use is when you're in a really bad mood, and everybody around you is having a great time. Let's say you're at a party, but you're in a bad mood, and you just you go over to the corner, and I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to enjoy this. That's what hell is like. It's that you've locked yourself away, and that breaks God's heart.
Another image, Bishop, that I love from C.S. Lewis, I don't know if you remember this, from the very last book of his Chronicles of Narnia series, The Last Battle. There's this scene where the lion Aslan, who's kind of the Christ figure, reclaims Narnia from an imposter. And then some of the Narnian children, Lucy, go into this stable where there's also a group of dwarves, and the dwarves are kind of the skeptics of the book. And Lucy's looking around this stable just in awe. It's like her entrance into the Narnian heaven. The stable's sort of this doorway. Yeah. But the dwarves look around and they say, why are we stuck in this pitch black, pokey, smelly little hole? And Lucy looks around at the same thing and says, but it isn't dark. Look around. Can't you see the sky and the flowers? And can't you see Aslan, all this stuff? Now, take that image for what it is. That's not to say heaven and hell are identically the same place, but I think it gets at that same Lewis idea that hell is sort of this self-imposed prison.
Yes. And along those lines, I remember my thesis director in Paris, Father Michel Corbin, used an image that I've seen elsewhere too, that heaven and hell, he said, are the same place. They're this great dining hall, and there's a table that's heaped with food. And everyone there has a long fork that's sort of affixed to his arm, right? Hell would be all these people trying to feed themselves. So they can't, because the fork is too long, and they can't feed themselves. Heaven are those who are around the table with these long forks, but they're feeding each other. So they're able to eat and enjoy this great feast. Those in hell are they're trying to feed themselves. They're caught up in selfishness, So that's the same idea, that it's the same place if you want, but it's our attitude vis-a-vis that place that makes the difference.
Okay, we got a couple more questions here, and both of these come from other countries outside of America. We love getting international questions, and we're especially excited hearing from kids all over the world. So first up here is Valentine. Here's his question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name is Valentine. I live in London and I'm 8 years old. I have 2 questions for you. First, how did God start to exist? My second question is, how did God affect the Big Bang and create the universe? Thank you.
Wow, Valentine, you should be a philosopher or a theologian. I mean that. If you got questions like that at 8 years old, you're like young Thomas Aquinas, who was asking very deep questions when he was your age. So, follow those. That tells me a lot, that you're interested in these really deep, searching questions, and the church loves that kind of question. So you become a philosopher, a theologian. We need you. But here's the first one. How did God start to exist? See, God didn't start to exist, and that makes all the difference. And you're right. See, our instinct from our experience of the world is that everything starts to exist, right? I mean, I'm looking around myself right now in my office. I'm looking out the window. I'm looking at trees and houses and cars and my computer in front of me, the sweater I'm wearing. All those things started to exist, right? The trees, sprouted up from seeds, and the cars were made in factories, and my sweater was knitted together by somebody someplace. They didn't always exist. They came to be, right? Well, things that come into being have a cause, right? If nothing can bring itself into being. And so we say, all right, well, what caused all these things? Then we look at this and that. Well, by a very deep instinct of the mind, we keep looking. Well, okay, let's say the things that cause the cars and plants and houses and sweater around me, did they come into being? And you say, well, yeah, they came into being too. Well, then they must have had a cause, right? Well, trace that now all the way back. You have to come to something finally that didn't have a cause, because it didn't come into being. So we say about God that God always was and always will be, that God is eternal. He's outside of time. God is not like the trees and plants and cars and this sweater. He didn't come into being. God simply is, right? And so that's the answer to the first question, is that God didn't start to exist because he's the cause of all things. Now, your second question is related to it. How did God affect the Big Bang? And that's a really cool question because, see, the Big Bang, we've learned about that in about the last, 60 or 70 years. That's a pretty recent idea, that all of space and all of time came into being at one point. So they say about 13 some billion years ago, right? Because a lot of people over the centuries have said, oh no, the world's always been here. It's just always been around. There's always been matter. And we know now that's not true. In fact, matter and space and time came into being at a certain point. Therefore what? Therefore, there must have been a cause. There must have been some cause that's not in space and time, right? Because space and time came into being with the Big Bang. And so there's a cause that's outside of space and time, and that is so powerful that it can bring all of space and time into being. That is the reality we call God. And so you're right in saying we have to imagine a cause for the Big Bang. Now, how did God affect the Big Bang? That's your question. That's, I think, kind of lost in mystery. How does God do it? But that God did it, I think, yes, we have to say. Great questions, Valentine.
Hey, Bishop, let me ask a follow-up. I think on one of the past episodes when we were talking about Thomas Aquinas, we noted how famously he didn't think that you could prove that the universe had a beginning philosophically. He took that for granted because the church taught it and the Bible taught it, but he didn't think you could prove it philosophically. What do you think Thomas Aquinas would do? How do you think he would argue if he lived today where we had all of this scientific evidence supporting that fact?
He would have found things a lot easier in some ways. See, Thomas was, you're right, so intellectually honest that he said, look, maybe Aristotle's right. There's always been matter. Aristotle called it prime matter, which has always been around, along with the first mover. So Thomas said, okay, as a philosopher, I can't determine that question. Now, in light of the Big Bang theorizing, I think Thomas would have said, okay, now my second argument for God kicks in. Whatever comes to be must have a cause. So if the universe in its totality, including space, time, and matter, had a cause or came into being, they must have had a cause. So I think he would have found his path easier, and he would have, honestly followed that and would have exploited it.
All right, let's turn to the last question of today's episode. This one comes from Emmanuel, who's going to be introduced here by his mother. So here's the question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name is Angela from Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, and my son has a question for you. Here he is.
My name's Emmanuel. I'm 6 years old. And my question is, does God love everybody, even the devil?
And Bishop, let me first say, I love hearing the rest of the kids arguing in the background. That's the soundtrack of our life. So I love hearing a fellow parent experiencing that too.
I appreciated that too. And Emmanuel, it's a great question. And here's the answer. Does God love everybody? Yes. Yes. See, to love, this is my great hero, St. Thomas Aquinas, said, to love is to will the good of somebody else, right? So if you love your mother, you love your I don't know if it's your brother or sister in the background, maybe both. To love them is to want something good for them, right? So does God love everybody? Yes. And how do we know that? Because he brought them into being. God wanted your existence. God wanted you to have mind and will and laughter and fun. See, God loved the trees I'm looking at right now at my window. How do I know that? Because they're there, right? They're there. And so God willed them some good. So does God love everybody? Yes, because they wouldn't exist unless he loved them. Make sense? So does God love even the devil? Yes, absolutely. Because, see, the devil wouldn't exist unless God loved the devil. Okay. So you're thinking, all right, but I don't quite get that. Well, go back to now a couple of questions ago, remember? Where I talked about someone kind of locking himself away and the party's going on around it, but they're just refusing to get into it. The devil is a spirit who has said no to God from the very depths of his being. He said no to God. What's making his life so miserable? God's love. Does that make sense? See, that God keeps loving him because that's what God is. That's what God does. God keeps loving the devil, and the devil keeps saying no. And that makes the devil unhappy. It's like if you're stuck inside a cave for a long period of time and you haven't seen the light now for weeks and weeks, and now you're brought out of the cave suddenly into the bright light. What's that going to feel like? Well, it's going to feel like pain, isn't it? Like torture. So think of it that way: as the devil has so locked himself away in the darkness of his own sin, that God's love, which is just light all the time, that's all it is sunlight. It's like a torture to the devil. See, so, and that's why it's a very interesting thing that it's the love of God that's causing the suffering of the devil. Not because God wants the devil to suffer, he doesn't. But the devil is producing it by his own resistance to God. So it's a cool question, and it's a neat thing to think about.
Your description of the devil as stuck, as closed in a cave, it reminds me of one of your favorite images, which is Dante's depiction of the devil.
Which is so good, isn't it? Because Dante imagines the devil not in fire so much, but in ice. And I think that is much better. Maybe it's because I hate the cold.
That's more demonic to be in the ice.
Yeah, it is. But the ice, you're stuck and you're isolated. You can't move. And you're separated from people around you. That's a good image. And in Dante, the devil has great wings. He was an angel, of course, but they become like bat wings in his image. And as he flaps his wings, he's trying to fly. He's meant to fly, but he can't. He's stuck. And all he succeeds in doing is making the world around him colder. It's a great image for us. See, in our sin, because all of us, in the measure that we're sinners, fall into this trap. It's the love of God that keeps summoning us. So surrender to it. Accept it. Let it in. Stop resisting it. That's the key to the spiritual life.
Well, kids and parents, thank you so much for all your wonderful questions today. If you have questions for Bishop Barron, whether you're a kid or an adult, we'd love to hear them. Just go to askbishopbarron.com, record your question, and hopefully we can do many more of these kids Q&A episodes because we like doing them as much as you like listening to them. And also, one more thing, we're moving deeper now into Advent. Visit adventreflections.com and you can sign up there for free to receive daily Advent reflections from Bishop Barron. You'll get a short email each morning, which will have a reflection on that day's gospel reading from Mass. So it's a great way to start your day and prepare yourself as we move closer to Christmas. Well, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.